it just reminded me how much I love trial. I mean, as much as I'm down on lawyering, well, I'm at my best at trial. I just enjoy the process and the work. Good morning to you too, Maury. I don't know who a law illegitimate is, but
I see that moon rising.
I see trouble on the way. I'm calling from North Carolina.
Good morning, Mike. How are you? How are things down in North Carolina?
We got swollen lymph nodes. We're with a good year blimp down here in North Cac, as they call it. But we're doing well. It's beautiful outside, man.
Yeah, it's beautiful here in New England. I'm going to resume the end of the week of my murder trial, hop on a train and spend the weekend with one of my grandkids. So I'm looking forward to things. And today's reading, and I guess today's description, the New York Times gave it dramatic play. Guilty. Jury convicts Trump on all 34 counts. First ex-president to become a felon plans to appeal. What was your reaction to the verdict? I know what mine was, but we always begin with my opinion and then everybody hates it. So let's begin with yours and then we can all hate on you,
I said, sheesh. That was my literal reaction, because you were the first. I mean, within 2 minutes of the Reuters notification publishing, you sent me the article and I quickly scanned it and all I could say was sheesh. It's a dramatic undersell. I think that, I was reminded yesterday by one of our viewers, longtime viewers, Norm, that you were early and long on the belief that Donald Trump represents the canary in the Legitimacy coal mine.
He does.
And, obviously, I agreed yesterday, and this conversation I had yesterday was before the announcement. So when the announcement happened, I think all of that came flooding back. A lot of the early work that you and I did, really tracing the contours of Trump the man and Trump the phenomenon, and what really brought us together as a duo, this shared commitment to, picking apart the anatomy of what we consider to be an American crisis and institutional legitimacy. And I could think of no better exemplar of that than pulling out, just taking a broad view and realizing that a former president and leading challenger for election in this fall has been convicted on 34 counts of basically paper charges. It really, and I know that sounds reductive perhaps to you, Norm, but it just, it's like origami. It's just a game. And so I think that while we can get into the merits, as I often say, the substantive merits of the litigation du jour, and we should, because we're attorneys, and principally because you're one of the most experienced and perhaps one of the most important criminal defense litigators in the country. We have an obligation to do that. But, I see things in pictures, and I can't help but to think that we are living through a constitutional crisis of sorts. And we are also living through what will become recorded history that many of us watching right now will perhaps not agree with, if that makes sense.
Tell me more. Tell me what you mean by that.
So, I point people again. I feel like I've mentioned Cernovich a couple of times this week, and I'm going to do it one more time. The point I'm making, Norm, about this is that we have realized in the last probably 8 or 9 years that the halls of power, those that control our institutions, including what we would call the quasi-fourth branch of government, in the administrative agencies and regulatory agencies, that they have committed themselves to a pattern of control over the over this American experiment that was previously rendered to the margins of normal conversation, right? The tinfoil hat brigade, the Alex Joneses of the world. I think reasonable people, high-minded and reasonable people, have come to the conclusion en masse that much of our recorded history as Americans may have in fact been arbitraged, and I use that word correctly this time, in one way or
Still
the other.
don't know what it means.
What I mean is that what we read paints a picture of what we are to take as truth. You know, and then there are those that live through the recorded history that can give context to say, and what I'm saying right now is that many of us living through this moment will reflect upon published renditions of history, as it were, regarding the Trump era, and be able to point out with complete certitude that the narrative that perhaps Trump was the problem that everybody projected, that those in power and those with influence projected upon him, was nothing more than projection. It was almost what I want to say, a confession of sorts. So I'll turn it over to you.
Yeah, I mean, that's a different take, different than mine, certainly. But I do appreciate the notion that winners write history. And in the lack of a consensus about what who's in charge, as it were, or when there is a struggle for dominance and control within our cultural and political institutions, we have contesting narratives. And those narratives will produce differing versions of the truth, differing versions of what is truth. And and so as we, or at least I think we try to grope toward a meaningful center in American political life, that is a meaningful place where it's safe to take into account all points of view, see what they have in common, and then pick and choose what works to build a life together in common. I think that's an important perspective. I mean, Trump, I do think, is the canary in the coal mine. I mean, on his merits, he's not an appealing candidate to me, but yet I supported him in 2016, sat out 2020. Don't know what I'll do in 2024. I'll watch the election with real misgivings. Having said that, as a lawyer, and occupying the narrow intellectual perch that I do in American life, that is a criminal defense lawyer who actually litigates cases in courtroom. I was not surprised by the verdict at all. I mean, the fact of the matter is that monies were taken from Cohen's home equity account to purchase the silence under a capture and kill agreement involving Stormy Daniels to keep her quiet. And then when that money was returned to Mr. Cohen, it was returned in the form of a payment for legal services as a retainer. And that was reported on public documents. To me, that's indisputably false. And thus, that misdemeanor offense, there was no question in my mind that Donald Trump would be convicted of that. The felony is where I kind of get confused. And we talked yesterday about the specific unanimity thing, and my thoughts ripened in the course of the day. And I begin to think that there may be a good appellate issue on that felony, because the state is required to prove with unanimity each and every element of an offense. And so on the offense of having submitted a false public record, that is characterizing as a payment for legal services what was in fact hush money, I think that's pretty clear. But the purpose in doing so, was that to avoid taxes? Was that to avoid state New York State,
the cheapest option,
campaign laws, federal campaign laws? It seems to me that the jury should have been unanimous on that as well, because insofar as that transforms this case into a felony, that element is what made it a felony. And it's hard for me to understand why New York law, or any law, or due process in general, would permit that to come in under less than specific unanimity. Now, the counter argument to that, and it's a good lawyerly argument, and I don't have a great lawyerly answer to it, is that if burglary is the intention, is going into a home at night to commit another crime, jurors are not required to agree on what that other crime could be.
I meant, Norm, whoever commented yesterday hates it when I interrupt you, but you're like a freight train, so I don't think it hurts your feelings when I jump in.
Both of them.
I meant to bring that up yesterday when we were reading those jury instructions, and I guess, point out sort of the absurdity in my mind of using the burglary elements as instructive of specific unanimity, as it were, in a falsification of business records lawsuit, right? In terms of trying to help the jury understand that, yeah, you intend to enter the premises of another unlawfully at night, right? And to commit a felony therein, right? Maybe I got the Barbary version of that correct, but that is very physical in nature. And it seems to be a disingenuous comparison to illustrate the state of mind necessary for Donald Trump to have falsified business records with an unlawful intent, right? That I think that's my issue, is that these are all sort of very paper chart, like very technical folly, right? Very, very very ref trying to keep score in a non-traditional way for one of the teams on the court. And I get it. I understand what you're saying. And aside from it being ripe for some sort of appellate issue, this undoes the legitimacy of a Republican form of government, in my opinion, Norm. For someone of this level of fame, of celebrity, of support, right, and of promise, with a track record all his own already as ascending the highest office in the land, this to me is I don't know exactly what we're trying to
But I think the thing that
I don't know
troubles
what
me
we're trying
when I
to
hear
rule
you
for.
saying that, you're almost saying there's a two-tiered system of justice. Celebrities and the powerful get a pass on
No,
non-nominal
not at
discretion.
all. I'm not at
You know,
all.
another line of attack on these charges, and you know, some commentators are saying that it's promising, is that this statute is vague, and it may offend due process. That it's not clear what it means to falsify a public record, and therefore there could be a sufficient facial challenge to the application of the statute itself. And this would resemble in great degree the 1512 attack on official proceedings in the January 6th proceedings. So there are great appellate issues in this case. There's the facial challenge to the public records. To the public records misdemeanor. There is the specific unanimity issue as to the felony element. I think if I were an appellate judge, I would reverse on grounds of Judge Merchan throwing the public out of the courtroom to ream out I think it was Frank Costello, one of Trump's witnesses late in the case, to admonish him against any further contempt of court. It seems to me that at that very moment, at the moment that Judge Merchan removed the public from the courtroom, he violated Trump's Sixth Amendment right to a speedy and public trial, not to mention the rights of the rest of us to First Amendment access to the court. So I expect that there will be a good attack, a good appellate attack. Anonymous says these aren't public records. They were private accounting records of the Trump Organization, a private company. If those records were required to be turned over in a public forum as part of a compliance regime, they may not be public records per se, but they were submitted to the public for scrutiny. And committing fraud on those records is every bit like overstating your tax deductions. Now, people will say, if Trump had claimed to have 4 kids rather than however many he has, and had been prosecuted for overstating his exemptions, should he have been prosecuted for that? Well, no, that's politicization. That's lawfare, they'd say. But people get prosecuted for that all the time. But the problem is not everyone gets prosecuted for that. There's a certain amount of tax fraud that appears to be tolerated. My experience with the defensive tax cases is that preparers are usually picked up on an algorithmic basis. If too many people are getting too many good returns, and it's the same preparer, that preparer gets scrutinized and likely prosecuted. Having said that, there are 2 arguments as to Trump. First, he was singled out for special scrutiny and scorn because of his status in a way that's unfair to his status. The counter argument would be, in my view, that because of his status, he invited the scrutiny. When he sought to become leader of the free world and to become the standard bearer for democratic institutions, his integrity was my game, and he called himself into question. So, I know that our listenership is divided on this. My 2 cents worth is that he indisputably submitted false records and falsified what those payments were to Cohen. And that likely satisfies the misdemeanor requirements. Whether the trial withstands.
I don't see it that way at all. I want to just kind of counter that by saying that practically that's not at all what Trump didn't even know what the hell was going on with this stuff. Why would he? He's flying at too high an altitude to even know. Right. And
evidence suggests he was at meetings where it was discussed.
No, look, the $130,000 was lumped into what, $450,000 Cohen admitted to stealing from the Trump organization while he was on the witness stand, right, testifying about this. And so what I'm saying to you and what I said on previous streams and what I've said to the viewers is that this falsification of business records, fine. Norm, I can agree with you and still think that this shouldn't be criminal in nature because of how widespread of a practice this is. Purchasing a story and burying it is a widespread practice. How are you supposed to account for it with the IRS? Seriously?
Well, I don't think you account for it I don't think you account for paying hush money as a business expense. And
is that what they qualified it as? Hush money? They said that it's an NDA.
No, listen to it, but it's not. When you call that money a retainer, that's a deductible business expense. Is an NDA deductible? So when you pay somebody to be quiet and hush money, is that a deductible business expense?
So is he guilty of tax evasion?
That might be the predicate. That's one of the predicates that.
Why did they bring that? Right. And this was all related to. So again, this is what gets me back to what, like, the issue of this is that this is it was illegitimate as a premise, right? This story was shopped and there were buyers. Trump was a potential buyer of the story. If he didn't buy the story, somebody else would have. And so the calculus here, the intent, the unlawful intent was to do whatever was most cost effective. Was it more cost effective to allow her to shop it to another media outlet and then fight it in the public forum, right? In the media? Perhaps not. It would probably be 10x on the 130, right? So just buy it. Fine. Is that that's what she wants for it? Get it. Cool. All right. We're done.
That's not the crime charge. The crime charge is that's not the crime charge. The crime charge is misrecording and falsifying a record by claiming it was wages in effect to Cohen when it wasn't. I mean, to me, that's just indisputably the truth.
Trump is over here doing all of his own itemizations. You know what I mean? Like
he was present at meetings and endorsed this. Look, anybody out there have the means and the ability to acquire that trial transcript? Get it for us, because I'd love to read it. I think Lawyer
Will is on my side this morning. I'm going to read a couple of his comments. Good morning to everybody, by the way. We have a lot of people here. Let's see. Lawyer Will starts by saying NDAs are not illegal. Agree, obviously. Non-disclosure agreements are extremely common. I've never heard of NDA being classified as a campaign contribution. There is a legitimate two-tiered system of justice when an individual is running for president, and charging an individual amounts to putting a thumb on the scale for an election. The problem is this was a novel legal theory, and Trump was not allowed to present expert testimony on the campaign contribution issue. And then said, and he also went on to say that an NDA is a legal expense, and also that he has worked with Brad Smith, brilliant guy. So, Lawyer Will, I think, I wanted to kind of, I'm using you because you support me this morning, and Norm is looking at the comments, and also because I agree with you.
I mean, look, I think reasonable minds can disagree about this. I think one of the things that bothers me about New York's decision to prosecute Trump and the federal government's decision to prosecute Trump is there is something called, at least in the Justice Department, and don't laugh, everybody, there is something called the public integrity section. And that section is supposed to approve prosecutions of candidates so as to avoid putting the taint of a prosecution having its thumb on the scale of the political process. I don't think there is such a review process in New York State. And obviously, New York State is a state court prosecution. So reasonable minds will disagree about this. Sentencing will take place.
This is where I get to, though. I think you started this conversation, Norm, by asking me, my thoughts. And I think that I very quickly came to the realization that I don't know that the Constitution was drafted and framed to handle this situation at all. I blame the political establishment that is using the Constitution and bending it in novel ways, and not just here. I mean, think about trying to disqualify Trump from appearing on the ballots in Colorado and Maine, respectively, right?
I mean, I hear that, but I don't know what it means. I mean, the Constitution is written in general terms, and it's written for the
No,
ages,
it
and its
was in good
application
faith,
depends on
right?
the circumstances. And I just don't think it was written in such a way as to constructively say that presidents and former presidents can never be accused of a crime. I just don't think that makes any sense. Now, whether this is much of a crime, I don't think it's going to. I don't think it's going to. Result in Trump's being incarcerated. I saw some commentary last night that he could be placed on home confinement or conditions of probation that would make it difficult for him to be a candidate. I think that's odd. I think what's more likely is that judgment will be imposed when a criminal case goes to judgment. When a person is sentenced, that's the end of the criminal case. And so, candidly, while the jury has found Trump guilty, he's not yet a felony. No judgment of not yet a felon. No judgment of conviction has entered. There'll be post-trial attacks on the motion. Those will likely, or on the verdict rather, those will likely be denied. And at the time that sentence is imposed, then Trump will become a felon. Blue Raptor, I've gone full on Joe Biden mode here. I don't even read Joe Biden. Blue Raptor, get a life on another page. I'm just gonna stop reading your comments. You're sort of like an ex-wife who just can't get over the fact that I've moved on. I don't know.
Will says that they will try to put him in jail. He guarantees it. I tend to agree. And Norm, I think that the reaction here is really that you seem to be content to treat this as any other criminal prosecution.
I do. I'm a lawyer.
But it does a complete disservice to this, like the profession of law, right?
I think that's wrong.
No,
I don't think there are special rules for special people. I just don't.
But if there
and
are,
I never have, and I never will.
Crazy, Norm. That is just that's crazy. I don't know why you have suddenly decided that context is irrelevant. Right?
The context is relevant, and I've commented on it. But if you're going to say
you agreed with me that Trump is the canary in the coal mine. Why?
Yes. Because I don't find him to be an attractive personality or particularly well suited to the office, but tens of millions of people do, and they passionately support him regardless of what he does or says. And therefore, he represents something to the American public that the American public deeply needs to have expressed. And I'd call it a populist rage. I'd call it a reaction against a system that people believe is indifferent to them and isn't working. And he promises with his MAGA talk a return to making America great, which I think is really just a call to nostalgia. It's a sort of reactionary trend to say we can make Ozzie and Harriet the national hero and heroines again. And I think that there's an extent to which his head is buried in the sand and he's not open to the new realities of our time.
That seems like a complete shift from what you meant by the canary in the coal mine, especially during the Proud Boys trial. So I respect.
I'm not sure it's a complete shift. I think he's always been that canary in the coal mine. I think I said at the time of the Proud Boys trial that so much of election denialism is a conspiracy theory that is independent of the facts. I think people can't accept the results of political elections in this country for reasons I don't understand. But I think the continuing unwillingness to do so reflects a broader crisis of legitimacy that's going to lead to violence and is going to lead to chaos and at a minimum to a failed state.
So what would you have Trump do? Would you have him step aside in the interest of what?
I'd have him do exactly what he is doing. Have him fight it out. Have him take his appeal. Sitting next to him is Todd.
And you're willing to look at the volume of cases and the diversity of legal theories as purely coincidental, given the timing and everything else that we know about.
I've said before that this is
hurricane, about like all of these things that predated his election, that dominated his first term as presidency, and the fact that he lost in a hotly contested election, which is widely regarded as having been problematic on technological fronts in the private sector, as well as on the legal front in terms of the validity of the vote counting, right? So, and that's indisputable. I'm not even taking a position on that. So this is all, I think, that was really difficult for people to appreciate here, except from you, Norm, as it is me. But I do still think talking the way that we are is really productive. But I think that what's really difficult for people to accept and swallow is that this is all to be taken as purely coincidental and just in the normal course of political and legal business.
Even if it's not coincidental, even if it is a misapplication of prosecutorial discretion, the law has settled forms for that. Bring a selective prosecution claim, bring a malicious prosecution claim, bring an abusive process claim. If those claims fail, then what's the result? He doesn't report to sentencing. He declares the courts illegitimate. He calls for violence against the judges. I mean, look, the fact of the matter is Donald Trump got prosecuted. It's a thin prosecution. New York shouldn't have brought it. In bringing it, it did tremendous harm to the republic. The process, however, which I believe in, played itself out. There was a full trial on the merits. There are live appellate issues in this case. An appellate court could well conclude this is a misapplication of the law. All I'm saying is play out the legal process. These attacks on it as somehow illegitimate, this attack on the illegal process as a proof of corruption, as proof of the deep state, this, that sounds like knucklehead conspiracy theory that you get with a cup of cheap and lukewarm coffee at a diner, and it doesn't sustain. I mean, where we solve our public crises, our public conflicts, at least some of them, is in a courtroom. And we take the cases up through the courts. And when the final court has spoken, we say we're done. Now, in the Donald Trump case, when the final court has spoken, he'll say we're just beginning. And now it's time to attack the courts. And that's a move that I don't respect him for, because I'm a court crony. I believe in the rule of law.
It's almost, I mean, it's borderline theological, Norm. The way
it's respect for the institution.
I mean, it's borderline. It is borderline like Pope-esque, right? I mean, like members.
No, it's not Pope-esque. I don't kiss the robe of any justice. I believe that justice is fallible. I believe that legal doctrines are the work of centuries of compromise and dispute and consideration by judges. I believe that when you bring a client into court, that client has interests. You identify those interests. You identify the law that applies to it, and then you argue your client's interest under the shadow of the law, trying to persuade the judge that your view of the law is right. If the judge disagrees with you, what you don't do is go to the press and attack him and his family. That's ad hominem and irresponsible. You perfect your issue and you move on to an appellate court. If the appellate court disagrees, you take it to a higher court. If a higher court disagrees, you may have an injustice, but I don't think that calls for disbanding I don't think that calls for disbanding the legal system. I don't think it calls for civil war. I think it calls then for a wholesale change of the law. And the law has always been a product of the civilized work of people dedicated to the principled adjudication of very real conflicts, sometimes life and death conflicts between people.
I actually think, Norm, I'm coming to the realization, I think that this is one of the most based takes imaginable, because I'm sitting here thinking, many people, again.
What does it mean to be based?
Based is just like foundational truth. Just, avoiding all of the fat and getting right to the most lean parts of an intellectual proposition. Based, right? I think that perhaps, the grating nature of what you're saying is, how do I want to frame this? You heard it here first. Turnabout is fair play. Right?
I don't know what you're talking about.
Turnabout is fair play. Look, if the institutions are completely legitimate, they're functioning as intended, right? Trump has to go through the legal process. He needs to mount an adequate defense. And we're going to assume that the processes themselves are legitimate, that they're not corrupted, that things are proceeding as normal, as intended, and well functioning, even if they're not as efficient as we want. And maybe there are appellate issues to resolve. Turnabout is fair play. Everybody, look, the institutions are functioning normally. What we are learning right now is that it just matters who is in power.
I think that's true. I really do think it does.
So again, I think, look, that's why I said I think that you're taking one of the most based approaches, knowingly, wittingly, or unwittingly, right? Based.
I hear based. That's not a term I use. Somehow I feel like I'm being insulted.
Look,
don't even know it.
No, you're not. I'm not insulting you at all. It's a compliment when used. I'm not insulting you. I'm saying that, look, the other way to look at this, everybody, right, is that not that the institutions are on fire and that we need to reform them. It really is just a competition to get ideologically aligned people back into the same institutions, and for the pendulum to swing the other way, to exact some sort of volume of prosecution against those that have perceived to have wronged us culturally and are intersecting the future of American capitalistic interests abroad, right? And use the taxpayer dollars to cut funds and checks to people who are in other parts of the world, funneling money back to themselves unlawfully, right? Not solving problems they claim to solve, right? We can all do it. We can all do it. That's the message at the bottom of this. It's actually somewhat hopeful.
My view is politics does matter. I think that New York, I do not support the prosecution of Donald Trump in New York. I think it was improvident. I think prior to Alvin Bragg, a prior district attorney passed on it. I can't recall who wrote a book on that decision. I read it at the time. It's 2-3 years old. Bragg decided to bring questionable applications of the law into a courtroom, and now they will be tested, just as the 1512 theory was tested in the January 6 cases up through the upper courts. In the end, there's going to be a winner and a loser. And in the end, the decision to prosecute was essentially political. I will agree with that. But I will also agree that the party in power has the right to make those decisions. If you're not the party in power and you don't like the decision, then become the party in power. But you can't handicap the law, I believe, at least, and say that some people are beyond its reach. If the law has been misapplied, Donald Trump's got good lawyers. I mean, I don't know that I've said it enough. I want to shout out to Todd Blanche, Trump's primary lawyer in the New York case. I thought he did a spectacular job perfecting the issues, standing by his client, keeping his cool, following his client's lead. And I hope that Trump sticks with him on appeal. I think there are fantastic appellate issues in the Trump case. Were I an appellate judge, I would throw it out just on the grounds that Merchan excluded the public from the trial when he admonished one of Trump's witnesses. I think that was one of the most outrageous and jurisprudentially wrong moves I have ever seen in a courtroom. But the notion that somehow, I guess what I'm reacting to, Mike, is the discussion about what I'm reacting to is the approach to the Trump trial is somehow sui generis, is somehow so different than anything else that has ever occurred in our republic, that it requires a special set of lenses and a special set of considerations, and that somehow it sheds a light on our legal system that says our legal system is not up to the task of adjudicating every case or controversy brought before it. And I shudder to think of that, because if we come to the conclusion that there's a class of cases or controversies that our judiciary is not up to, then we're going to have to ask, where do they go?
Hey,
and do they go to a star chamber? Do they go,
I'm with you. I'm 100% with you. I like the faith in the institutions. I'm through the woods now, Norm. I'm through the intellectual woods. It is what it is. Turnabout is fair play. So it's a call to action ultimately. And it should be the case now that the establishment politicos should be agreeing with one Vivek Ramaswamy that we need to absolutely get rid of 85% of the bureaucratic bloat, because that is all susceptible to cultural change. Okay? Right? And so if 150 million people at least are sick to death of the political excesses and apparent conflicts of interest and corruption at the highest levels, it's only a matter of time before the temperature changes inside these institutions. And that young people who are in the households of these people who are paying exorbitant costs for groceries, exorbitant costs for business loans, home loans, whatever you've got. I
want to make a couple comments.
Go ahead.
Janet, if only I were familiar with Andy Ngo's work, I'd realize how absurd he sounds. I'm somewhat familiar with Andy Ngo's work, but let me tell you something. I'm intimately familiar with the work of any number of conspiracy theorists, and I'm here to tell you they're the ones who sound absurd. And if you're out there in the morning looking for your news from someone who's decided that he or she's got the special angle on it all and can explain it all from some fulcrum point situated in the deep state, this, that, or the other way, you're doing yourself and the Republic a disservice. And I would encourage you to listen elsewhere. Blue Raptor Mike needs to find a new co-host. That's fine. Maybe you need to find a new show, Blue Raptor.
Look,
I've done my time on the conspiracy theorist line and spent 5 years of my life defending people's right to
Norm,
say
you don't know
what
what
they
the hell
want
you're
to say.
talking about. What do you mean? You don't know what a conspiracy theory is.
Apparently not. Apparently not. Andy No was insulted by Antifa. I mean, God, people, get over it. This is a republic of individuals, much like yourself. You're not all members
Oh
of
man,
secret
Norm,
society.
you are based as shit today. And I seriously, it feels good to kind of have this realization about you. You're a rough and tumble guy, Norm.
I don't know if I'm a rough and tumble guy,
You
but
are. You are.
I go to court every day.
Look, you've been getting criticism because people thought that you were just too high-minded and just kind of ultimately what you're saying. And I know I'm putting words right in your mouth, but I'm translating for people because I'm having sort of this revelation in real time, right? You are all about the battle. You are all about the fight. That's why
the fight is. I always tell the lawyers, the young lawyers,
that's why your clients love you. I get it. I totally get it,
tell
man.
the young lawyers in our office, our cases are
it doesn't
very
solve any of the problems I've talked about today at all, but it is a path forward. This is the first time on any of the shows that I watch or listen to or whatever, things I read, that I felt somewhat optimistic about a plan.
And the plan is to educate yourself on our institutions. The plan is to use the institutions. The plan is to enter the institutional fray. The plan is to be intellectually honest when you're addressing your critics. The plan is not to take the coward's way out. The plan is to say to conspiracy theories, put up or shut up. And the plan is to say to your neighbor, the person across the street from you, let's shake hands and talk about what we can agree on, because we agree on far more than we disagree on. And the plan might be to say, who's really benefiting from this toxic level of disagreement in the United States? It's not the American people. It's somebody else. We need a new class of leadership. But having said that, we spent all of our time on Donald Trump today, and we ignored Scottie Scheffler again.
Oh, we got a couple minutes here. I know you got to get to court because you got important things like murder trials to.
But no, I'm not going to do the murder trial because the fix is in. My client is Hispanic, and therefore the white power structures decided he's got to go, and it's going to be
no. He's a member of the political elite. He's brown.
Hey, let me tell you some funny story. When I was in a pretrial not long ago where my client was white, and it was a pretrial is an informal discussion with a judge about whether a case can be plea bargained. And so the prosecutor and I were in there, and the judge comes up with a number of an amount of time that this man should go to prison for his lifelong habits of thievery and whatnot. And I look at the judge and I say, that's just racism. And he looks at me and he said, what are you talking about? I said, look, that's just racism. You only want him to go to prison for so long because he's white. If he were black, you'd be talking about systemic racism and looking for lesser time. Judge told me to get out of here, and I did.
Let's listen to well, I don't know if we want to listen to this or the first few seconds of let's do this one. This is the prosecutor, just the first few seconds.
May it please the court, Your Honor, today I will be tendering to the court a motion to dismiss all the charges against Mr. Scott Scheffler.
Boom, baby.
Yeah.
Boom, baby. And then here, we'll do this, 55 seconds. This is his attorney after all of that.
Steve, I have to ask you, though, the statements that Scottie made after the arrest don't seem to fully align with what you're saying right now. He admits that he got impatient and went too far.
No, here's what happened, is he is being interrogated after the most stressful situation of his life, right? And the officer is actually asking him leading questions and trying to get him to agree with them, okay? And that's why you don't talk to the police, because they are going to try to put words in your mouth.
But
and
this was
that's exactly what they did.
But that was after he read his Miranda rights. He didn't have to speak.
He didn't have to speak. But again, he asked to talk to the officer. He wanted to explain to him what happened. However, they are trying to get him to confess to something that he didn't do. And the video evidence shows he didn't do it.
My man sounds like he's at an NC State tailgate. I love this guy.
I got my testosterone pills in me this morning, and woman, if you want to talk about it, I got the time. You know,
I love this guy. Fiery. The last thing that we'll throw up here is just Detective Brian Gillis's statement. Says Mr. Scheffler and I both agree that there will be no ill will over this going forward. Instead of giving a negative public reaction, he chose to speak with dignity, humility, and respect. My family and I appreciate that. It was unfortunate and disturbing to hear Steve Romney's commentary today, claiming that a, quote, false arrest was made and for him to challenge my honesty and integrity. Whatever, man. Cry more. I love the Scottie Scheffler situation. I do have some of that grainy video, Norm. It's not really that helpful, I think, other than to show that sort of the $80 pants dragging on the ground, all that kind of stuff was vastly overblown and very hyperbolic from the beginning. I'm glad for this. I think Scottie Scheffler is one of the most talented guys in professional golf. He's a champion, and he's also very even-tempered by all accounts. He's not braggadocious, plays the game in an enviable way, one way that I will teach my son to play whatever games he decides to indulge as he gets older. So I'm glad for this. I'm glad for a fiery criminal defense attorney. Everybody knows that. I love myself a good fiery criminal defense attorney, don't I, Norm?
you do.
What else we got? A lot of people here today. We are crushing over on Rumble for the first time. I want to shout out to In the Cloud, $10 tip over on Rumble today. Thank you very much for that. Very much appreciated. She says, cheers to based Norm.
We're going to have a little bit of a talk after the thing. I still don't understand this based.
Everybody in here has told you that it's a compliment, and it is. It is truly.
Well, I mean, I don't want to defend myself. That's not what I'm here to do, because I'm just a vehicle for ideas that I believe, frankly, and maybe I'm a lawyer and too much of one. But if you walk into my office accused of murder, accused of sexual assault, accused of bank robbery, accused of fraud, accused of any number of crimes, your fate becomes my responsibility, and your interest in your liberty, your interest in your reputation, your interest in your desire to support, feed, and be with your family throughout their lives becomes my responsibility. And my way of dealing with your interests is to study the law and to study the charges against you and ask whether those charges are based in fact or something else. And if they're based in something else, I'll attack them and try to get them thrown out of court. If they're based in fact, I'll go to trial. And then I will use the rules of procedure, the rules of evidence, the substantive rules, my skill at cross-examination to do everything in my power to persuade a jury that you are not guilty, that there are reasonable doubts as to the state's case. If I, for one moment, lost faith in that system, I wouldn't go into it, because in that case, I would have no confidence that the judge acted with integrity in deciding the law. And if I see a judge who I think is acting without integrity, I'll call the judge out. I'll call it out on the record, and I have done so, and I have sometimes paid the price for doing so. But the fact is that the law is an adversary profession, and a lawyer is a gladiator on behalf of his client. And when you enter a courtroom, you do so to fight, not in hand-to-hand conflict that is unbounded by rules, but in a rule-bound context superintended by a judge who is presumably doing the job of a neutral and detached magistrate. We realize that not all judges succeed every time, and that's why we have appellate courts. I lose a case, I take an appeal. We win a great number of appeals in cases that we've lost. You lose a case in the appellate court, you go to the state Supreme Court. If the issue is more significant than that, you can take it to the U.S. Supreme Court. But there comes a time, folks, where every case has run its course. And like it or not, there's a final decision. And every mature lawyer knows that the courts sometimes, perhaps often, get it wrong. But no mature lawyer says that because the courts sometimes and perhaps often get it wrong, we should ditch the courts and resort to violence or resort to street justice, or say that some classes of conflicts ought not to go to courts. So call me a based blue-nosed, naive, out-of-touch person that no one wants to listen to. And then ask yourself,
you are a based, blue-nosed, naive, out-of-touch person that no one wants to listen to.
Then find another channel, folks.
We have almost breached a promise that we made yesterday to Justin Wright. Do you want to talk about the distressed flag very briefly?
Yeah, let's do that. Yeah.
Let me pull it up. I'll pull up the picture that he sent us. Justin, thank you for sending this yesterday, and I'm glad I remembered that. I promised you that we would at least address it here. So here we go.
So, flying a flag upside down is a sign that you believe the nation is in distress. And I don't see the commentary on Justin's piece, but he believes that the course that the country is taking, given our leadership and given the decisions that people make, mean that the nation is in peril, is in jeopardy, and that we're under distress. And he has a right to fly that flag in that way, just as Justice Alito's wife had a right to fly her flag in that way. Reasonable minds can agree or disagree about what to do about the American experiment. That's why we have elections. That's why we have political parties. That's why in moments of extreme stress, parties sometimes realign. And that's why, folks, throughout the majority of American history, we've had an extremely violent political history. Our history thus far, this past few years, is remarkably unviolent for the tensions that we've experienced. And so I believe that the flag is a sign of great distress throughout the country. I think people are right to express it, but you have to ask yourself, what are you going to do about it? Are you going to organize? Are you going to become a member of a political organization and a group that expresses your point of view? Or are you going to call for dissolution? Are you going to engage in violence? I think the responsible thing is to grope toward the center and ask your neighbor, how do you want to live? How can we best live together?
Agreed on that last point. Jackson Barrett says, Norm, the appeal process must be expedited. And I agree with that.
Yeah, that's true.
I agree with that. I think if there's criticism to be had about your otherwise completely based position here today, Norm, it is that the aspect of this that went undiscussed is the lawfare angle, right? The use of the process as the punishment. And I've long criticized that on this podcast and on this stream. And I think, again, Jackson, you and I have been chiseling away at this phrase of using the courts for false authentication of certain narratives or judicial authentication of false narratives. I think that is the real that exposes the real shortcoming of the lack of timeliness of the appellate process. So I agree with that. Anyway, we got to get out of here, man.
Yeah, I guess we do. I've got.
Hey, are you going to be on Laid Back Law today, by chance?
No, we're on day 5 or 6 of this murder trial. We hope to wrap it up next week. So I will be deep in evidence in New Haven. Are you going to be on?
I believe I might. I got the invite, and I think that based on the way I'm feeling right now, I probably will. So
well, tell everybody I said hello, and I did a quick appearance yesterday. I was in the car and I got a text, do you want to do a live reaction to the Trump verdict? And so I did. I said, well, I'm not surprised. I think he probably is guilty of the misdemeanors and, the felonies. I have my doubts. And there was this silence. And somebody said, maybe we ought to mute him.
I think I tuned in. It was with Hunley and what was the other gentleman's name?
Ian.
Yeah, I think I tuned into that a little bit late after you got off, but they mentioned that you were talking about the specific unanimity there for a moment as well. But man, they were struggling without you. So anyway, thank you everybody for being here. You can find us here at LawPod Daily on YouTube, on Rumble, and on X. If you're watching right now or you're still watching, please make sure you've hit the like button. And you're subscribed. If you're moved to do so, hit the notification button, but make sure you tell a friend or you brag about us in one way or the other. We really do appreciate the support we're getting. I, for one, appreciate maybe jousting with a few of you in the comments to these videos when I think you've gone beyond the pale. So don't take offense to it. I actually get some weird sadistic enjoyment out of that. You can also find these streams uploaded in audio only format, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Play, Overcast, wherever you find podcasts. Please make sure to subscribe over there and leave 5 stars on that. And yeah, Norm, I think that's all I've got. I'm enjoying this. And again, truly, I think we hit a new level today. I think I had a revelation about how to steer going forward.
Well, AMF, yo-yo.
AMF, yo-yo. Everybody else, have a great weekend. AMF, thank you for being here. See you on Monday.